All right, guys, we'll kick off in here in just a second. Looks like I've got the invite posted to most of the social channels, so everybody should have a chance to join us. And I think we'll be recording this session as well, so have an opportunity for everybody to listen to it afterwards. But been really looking forward to this discussion about staking and MOR emissions. I think this is a really cool evolution of the tokenomics and sort of the whole way to signal timing and long-term commitment to Morpheus. So definitely a really important discussion. So yeah, we'll go ahead and kick off in just a second. Thanks for everybody being here. Good to see a lot of familiar faces, folks that are very active on Discord. So it should be a great discussion. All right, let's go ahead and kick off. This is, I think, probably been one of the most discussed and anticipated updates to Morpheus really since the launch. And I appreciate everyone's contributions to putting together all of the different aspects of staking, from the developers that put together the code to everybody that contributed to the design of the tokenomics. And I think this is really sort of a novel way to align people, right? And so I want to, first of all, give, credit to the Anons that contributed some of this work and the papers that went into it, to all of the authors of the different MRCs, as well as Mechaverse and Kasha and a lot of the others that contributed. But I think the final outcome of the MRCs for 38, 39, 40, 41, and 42 sort of create this holistic approach for people that want to be able to, really engage with Morpheus over the long term and express that over a time curve. So really excited about all the pieces coming together. Anton, are we recording it? You ready to go ahead and kick off? All right, great. So we've got the recording going. So that's sort of just a preface. I want to thank everybody for the contributions they made to pulling these different MRCs together. And I guess I would start by sort of giving the background and the history, right? The conversations really started even last year at a lot of the decentralized AI days, at the decentralized AI summits. A lot of in-depth discussion about how Morpheus can sort of reward those and align those that contribute to the project long term, right? And so there was a lot of concepts and ideas thrown around, but I'm really happy with the one that people sort of settled on, whereas I'm calling this MOR emissions staking, right? So rather than traditional staking, where somebody has an existing token and they deposit it, because Morpheus is so early in its emission schedule, right? The supply curve goes on for 16 years, and here we are, in the first 6 or 7 months. Most of the emissions are in the future, and so the concept of locking up your claims, delaying your claims into the future, right, and using that as a signal to the community that you're aligned is, I think, a really novel approach. And so that's sort of where the discussion ended up settling. And then there was a lot of papers back and forth about exactly how to implement that. And I think for those gathered today and people listening, I want to get into the practical aspects of how this is executed, right? There was a lot of discussion back and forth about, how to really ground the power factor, how to calculate what the proportionality should be for this MOR emission staking, right? And I think the stroke of brilliance by one of the Anons was to suggest anchoring it into the dilution rate, right? If somebody is holding MOR, right, or delaying their claim of MOR into the future, the sort of most logical and objective thing to do is look at how many MOR will exist in the future compared to when they began staking, right? And that was sort of a nice breakthrough because there had been a lot of, let's say, arbitrary or magical numbers thrown around as far as what the power factor should be and how to do the calculation. But once, we started grounding the conversation and the thinking in the dilution rate, it gave us sort of a solid ground to build off of. And that became the way to calculate the power factor. So let's ground this in a concrete example. If someone were to begin staking their MOR emissions and they were to lock them up for a year, well, a year from now, there'll be twice as many MOR in circulation as there are today, right? And so having a 2x on that power factor is perfectly logical, right? That's the dilution that person is experiencing during that time, right? And so, I think that if you look at the MRCs and if you see that curve that is presented that shows the different power factors for 1 year lockup or 2 years of staking or 3 years of staking or 4 years of staking, then it becomes sort of very clear how that works. And of course, the supply curve flattens over time, right? And so most of the dilution is experienced over the first 6 years or so. And so after sort of a lot of discussion, and thinking it through, that was the maximum of the staking time that was selected as far as calculating the power factor. You could stake as long as you like, all the way up through the 16 years of the supply curve and through all the emissions through 2040 if you want. But the power factor calculates through 6 years. So I believe the maximum power factor is like 10.7 when calculating proportionality. So the way to think about this going forward is if you're going to, be staking either capital or coding weights, you have at first your contribution, right? Okay, here's my STETH, and I place it into the contract. And then you're going to choose how long you want to stake that STETH, right? Do you want to stake it for, a month, 6 months, a year, multiple years? And there's a dashboard being developed and you'll be able to see the effect, right? Okay, if you stake it for this long, then here's your, power factor, right? Here's your calculation that goes into the proportionality, right? So the calculation becomes your stake ETH times your power factor equals your total weight in the proportionality calculation. And so it allows people to compete not just on amount of staked ETH, but on amount of time that they're willing to then stake those MOR emissions and delay their claims into the future. And I think this is really key for bootstrapping the network because it ought to align people that are in it for the long term and really want to support the network as opposed to sort of short-term farming of ETH, APY, and things like that. So anybody will still be able to stake their ETH and withdraw it whatever they want. It's important to be clear that the MOR staking does not affect your ability to withdraw the staked ETH. So staked ETH is still liquid. Anytime after 7 days, if you want to withdraw it, you can. But if you were to do that, you would then stop earning additional MOR, and you would sort of lose that power factor that you had been getting as long as you kept it staked. So that's maybe the first kind of things to talk through: how the calculation works. Staked ETH times your power factor equals your total weight. The weights are compared to everybody else in the system, and that creates what proportion of the MOR emissions you're getting. The fact that it doesn't affect the staked ETH liquidity, that you're able to still access that liquidity. We're talking about staking MOR emissions, not locking up staked ETH for any additional time. So that's an important thing to quantify. One of the other most common questions is, what if I, put in staked ETH and, I get a certain amount of power factor? Can I add more staked ETH later? You can always do that, but when you interact with your deposit again, the contract updates the power factor to the new power factor. So, if it's further along the staking curve and you were to deposit more staked ETH, and the power factor is lower in the future, then your entire deposit would get treated with that lower power factor, right? So what you really want to do is, if you decide to stake additional ETH, is use a different address, right? Because you have to keep in mind that the framework of the smart contracts for Morpheus is all about addresses, right? It treats an address as an atomic unit, and any interaction with that address affects the entire deposit in that address. So that's sort of a fundamental thing to understand. I also got the question, like, what if somebody else deposits a staked ETH to my address? Could it affect my my power factor? And the answer is no. Only deposits from your address will have an effect on the power factor. So you don't have to worry about an attack vector or something like that there. So, that's important to keep in mind as well. So, as I'm going through these, feel free to pop questions in to the chat, and I'll be sure to get those answered as we kind of go through this process. And I'm sure Anton can highlight some of the best ones for me so I don't miss any. But yeah, so we talked about the staking calculation. We talked about the limit of the power factor going out to 6 years as far as calculating that. We talked about the ability still to access liquidity of the staked ETH. And so, I think this is going to be an important shift, just to sort of give a status on this whole process. For those that have been watching GitHub, you've seen the code has been in the pull request. I think it's pull request 36 on the smart contracts repo for a while. I saw that there was a group, Maxon, today that put out a testnet, basically published the smart contracts onto Sepolia testnet. So for anybody that wants to try it, check out the announcement that got posted here on Discord and the other channels. You're welcome to interact with any of those Sepolia contracts, report any bugs or feedback, and can flow that back to the folks at Maxon if they need to update it in the contract. But sort of gives everybody in the community the opportunity to test it out and, understand how their amount of staked ETH and how long they decide to lock their claims affects their proportionality and their power factor. So that's really great. Appreciate Maxon for putting that out. And I'm expecting also sort of staking guides and things are coming together from different community members, as well as we talked about the dashboard that's being finished up right now, to make it sort of easy for people not to have to interact directly with the smart contract, but instead just be able to use a dashboard. So yeah, right now it's still looking like July 25th, which is only about a week away. So, if you want to get any testing in, this is a great time to do it. But seems like all the pieces are coming together for more staking to kick off. And I think we're going to do a separate AMA, and we can dig in more into the coding and the weights aspects, but wanted to sort of do this one today, mostly focused on the capital aspects. And so, I think that's important. I see some of the questions are about the weights as well, and I can get into some of those today. For example, Chasing Dreams is saying the treatment of an address as a whole for code. If you have 10,000 weights, you do 2,000 staked for 1 year and 8,000 unstaked. That's a great question. You would need to, and there's a form being developed right now, but you'd need to submit multiple addresses so that each of your weights can be treated differently. So if you want to lock up half of your coding weights, then you'd need to, use that for one address to do that staking. And then if you wanted to keep some of them unstaked as far as the MOR emissions go, then you need to use a different address for that. But there are over 270 code contributors, and if everybody decides to have 2 or 3 or more addresses, it's going to be tough to track manually, and so that's why the form is being developed, so everybody have a chance to fill out the form, and that'll all get put into a sheet and make it a bit easier to track. So expecting to use a form versus necessarily GitHub for the tracking of those weights as they as they go in. But yeah, as Anton's saying, feel free to drop in questions and we can start going through them. But that's sort of the basics that I want to go through today and get into the recording is how the calculation works, the maximum power factor that can be calculated out up to the 6 years. The fact that STETH is still liquid, sort of really drill into those aspects because that's, I think, some of the most important things the community will want to understand. So, okay. Well, with that, that's sort of my intro comments. Let's get into the AMA and we can answer all the questions as people get through the different aspects. Another good question from Chasing Dreams. Can the duration be extended for SPETH duration? For example, if I stake 1 year and decide in 1 month I'd like to extend to 6 years, can I update to 6 years or do I need to let the 1 year lapse? That's a great question. I believe it's listed in the MRC, the answer around the parameters and restrictions. And I think increasing the duration is the only one that is allowed. So I think you're able to do that. If somebody wants to pull that up from the MRC, we can check those details. But that's a great question because then you'd be increasing your power factor for that address, right? Obviously, you can't do the reverse, right? And if you decided to change your length of staking, you could always, withdraw your staked ETH and then redeposit it with a different address based on, a different amount of time that you want to stake. But it's interesting to think through the game theory, right? Because all of this is tied to the dilution rate, and now is the highest dilution rate there'll ever be, right, in the history of Morpheus, the highest power factors are available today versus 6 months from now versus a year from now. By the end of the first year, there's 5 million more in circulation. By the end of the second year, it's almost 10 million more. And so all future dilution from 10 million to 42 million is only 4.2x, right? And so the power factors reduce over time as the dilution reduces over time. So it's going to create an interesting game theory where, the most effective thing somebody can do is go ahead and deposit the maximum number of STETH and stake the MOR emissions for as long as they want in order to get the maximum power factor, right? That's sort of how the game theory is likely to play out, but we'll see. It's going to be interesting because it's likely to change the demographics of Morpheus contributors to those, that are interested in a long-term contribution and to, claiming those rewards over time. And it's helpful to understand what the benefit is to Morpheus is it effectively pushes out those claims to a future date and gives the protocol more time to bootstrap, right? More time to grow and build demand for smart agents, build demand for distributed compute, build demand for MOR 20 and all the different aspects of the platform. And so, I think that's really important, right? And sort of, I think that filtering for long-term commitment is really critical. Thanks, Anton. I see that you and Chris also posted some of the MRCs that talk through the restrictions. Yeah, especially MRC 42, I think is a great write-up and talk through that. Pirate Beard asks if it's possible to get involved with MOR using a transport by default chain like ETH. You just wanted to hold some. It's an interesting question. Some of the interoperability aspects will be worked on in the roadmap. It describes it as after the homestead phase. So just as a reminder to everybody, right, the Genesis period was, from when the white paper was created by the Anons until when the fair launch began. And we moved into this frontier phase, right, where people started staking ETH and, Code Words started providing more rewards. And we're moving into this new homestead phase where compute goes live, staking goes live, right? All of the types of MOR emissions are live except for builder rewards. And that's the thing that will come next after staking, has been fully gone live is the work on the builder rewards. And then so that's described as the next phase. And then after that, it goes into interoperability work. So I'd expect that to be after the builder rewards, but that's a great question. Anton's just saying, raise your hand if you have a request for a speaking spot, have something to share vocally. That'd be great. And so F121 is asking, just for clarification, there will be no effect on the 14,000 per day emissions, no time locks, no vesting for MOR rewards. So let me piece this apart. There will be no change to the emission schedule. So that's an important thing to be clear on, right? The staking, the MOR staking is not changing any of the supply curve, right? It doesn't alter the number of MOR in existence, and it doesn't change the rate at which MOR are emitted, right? The whole protocol started with 14,400 MOR per day and has been decreasing at about 2 MOR per day, right? And that's how you get to the end of year 16 when you get to the end of the first epoch emissions. And so all the staking does is change the proportionality of your rewards, right? So if you were to provide staked ETH and you stake the MOR emissions for a year and get a certain power factor, that gets multiplied and that provides your total weight in the system. So that's all it's changing is the proportionality. It's not altering the emission schedule. The emission schedule will remain the same and won't attract. It doesn't change the 42 million cap. It doesn't change the size of any of the buckets. It just changes the proportionality of the rewards. And it's worth pointing out also in a related question that the proportionality is calculated per bucket or per group, right? So proportionality within capital is calculated independently of proportionality within code, which is calculated different than compute rewards, which is calculated different than builder rewards. So each group of contributors is competing within their own contribution type. And that's been another important thing to clarify. And so Chasing Dreams is asking to confirm capital and code staking duration will be handled via the form provided until it moves fully on chain, or is the capital staking launching directly via on-chain transactions, while code staking will be via the form and maintainers manually handle it now? That's a really great question. The advantage of the capital contracts is all on chain, right? It's fully automated. The multi-sig, the admin can't change anything about staked ETH or MOR rewards or any alteration whatsoever. And so yes, capital is really fully automated, and we want to move towards that for all the buckets. But code today still requires the maintainers to manually update the weights, and then that gets published on chain to the smart contract. So the answer is for code that this will be done as a manual process, go through the same atomic governance, maintainer merging of weights. And so it's the same process that's been going on, just using a form to make it convenient to collect all the data. And then it will be published on chain, just like every month when there's an update to the snapshot, to the coding snapshot. So that'll get published on chain. But the initial weights and the form and getting that all calculated will be done manually until it gets published to the smart contract. But that's a great question to sort of differentiate those two. So they both end up on chain. There's just more manual steps right now when it comes to the coding weights. But there's a lot of work being done to further automate the whole coding weight process. Shout out to Scott and Maxon and others that are contributing to MOR.software and the dashboards and interfaces that are maturing for everybody able to manage that as a maintainer. The other thing that's maybe worth highlighting is this is sort of a broad update that will eventually roll out as well to MOR 20, right? So already some of the MOR 20 projects have been asking, hey, how do we align people based on time? And the answer, of course, is this MOR emission staking function. And so after this gets rolled out on Morpheus, it'll logically get extended to the MOR 20 contracts. And the more we can sort of support the community of projects building on top of Morpheus, especially with the MOR 20 contracts that already live with various groups, the more we can build guides for them, develop best practices, sort of make it easy for them to maintain, their community and their contributors. I think the better and the more players it will attract for Morpheus. But that's a great question as well. So let's see, other questions, just looking through some of the discussions here. Arthur S. asks a bit of a noob question. So the more rewards you get from the staked ETH, staking are staked to earn future MOR. Yes. And so he's asking, doesn't that create the sort of disincentive to buy more directly? That's a great question. So far it's been cheaper for people to stake ETH and earn the MOR emissions. But what will happen when the MOR emission staking goes live is it's going to change that equation, right? It's going to increase the competition for people providing staked ETH, and depending on how long they decide to stake those rewards, it'll effectively, if you think about it as, the value of the yield is what's contributed by people providing staked ETH, and that goes into the protocol own liquidity. And if you're locking up the rewards, you're effectively saying, I'm going to do that over this period of time, right? And so in a way, it's sort of increasing the cost to acquire more, right? Because you're committing to, do that for a longer period of time. And again, you maintain your liquidity. If you wanted to pull out your staked ETH, you can, but you're getting that multiple because you're delaying the claiming of your rewards for a longer period, right? So it'll be interesting to see how that game theory plays out. And, effectively, I expect, there will be, sort of a balance and equilibrium that will develop over time, right? And, for those buying more on Uniswap, they can sort of get instant access to the MOR, right? And as soon as compute goes live on mainnet, you're going to be able to use that MOR to access inference in Morpheus. You're going to be able to eventually stake more toward projects that you want to support, right? So there's a lot of use cases for having existing MOR tokens versus, earning them in the future from staked ETH. So, it depends on what you want to get out of Morpheus. If you want to use it immediately for inference, then buying more off Uniswap is great, right? Or if you wanted to buy it to stake towards certain projects when builder rewards go live, that's sort of an immediate use case. As opposed to if you want to support the long term of the project's development and provide staked ETH and earn more, at a very competitive rate, then that's a great alternative, right? So it'll be really interesting to see how all of that comes into equilibrium as this develops. But there's a lot of good questions around that, and it'll be interesting to see it play out. So other questions, just going through some of the ones here on the side. I think it's helpful to grok that, this will be applied across multiple groups, multiple contributor types. We've talked a lot, about capital and code today, but this will also get applied over time, at least for, signaling of reputation and things like that when it comes to compute providers and to builders that are, launching interfaces and applications. This same mechanism can be used for signaling, right? To understand the reputation of that project and how aligned they are with the long term of Morpheus, right? And so that's important to understand, though. Effectively, there's two different types of staking here, right? And that's probably worth emphasizing as well. What we've been talking mostly today is about more emissions staking, right? How long in the future until you claim your tokens, right? And that applies to uh, both the capital providers and the code providers. But those that are, going to be engaging in providing compute, they're primarily staking existing MOR tokens, right? And I really like the approach that Ryan Condron and the folks at Lumen have pioneered, is sort of, using that approach of staking existing tokens to prove that somebody is economically aligned with the network, um, without, sort of creating an artificial constraint of, only so many providers, right? So unlike if you looked at that MRC in particular, that type of more staking doesn't, only allow the top couple of stakers, but anybody can stake towards becoming a compute provider and earn up into what they stake, right? And so that's something I would compare very similar, if you're familiar with the tokenomics of Filecoin, to how they approached their tokenomics, which worked very well for people wanting to provide data storage. And here, in the case of providing compute, I think it makes a lot of sense to emulate those same best practices. So that's an example of somebody staking existing coins. And then the same will be said for builders, right? They're staking existing more towards somebody's project. And the question came up the other day: can you do both? Unfortunately, you can't do both at the same time. So everybody effectively has to make a choice. Do they want to, uh, claim their more and engage in compute provision or staking towards projects, or do they want to stake those more emissions into the future and earn a higher power factor? But you can't do both. You sort of have to make a fundamental decision, about which is more important: you sort of earning more tokens or using them for their immediate utility, right? And I expect that will sort of shift over time, right? A lot of the utility of Morpheus today is in the future, right? Being able to use it for compute or towards supporting projects, versus we're still effectively in this frontier homestead phase of bootstrapping the network. I think my expectation, a lot of people are going to stake their more emissions rather than do short-term claims. And so, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and we'll sort of go through that and explore that as it goes. Chasing Dreams has another good question. Let's see. Someone stakes for 6 years, gets a 10x multiplier. They win, the staker earns 10.7. What somebody who doesn't stake does in 5 years will be 10x the difference. Does the difference diminish over time? The final days of staking, you'd earn 1.01x the amount of a non-staker. That differently, is the calculation based on stake date versus finish date, or the current date versus the finish date? Happy to refer to the MRC. So this is a really good question. And this goes back to what I was saying when it comes to the game theory. The power factor that you lock in when you decide to stake your more emissions remains that power factor. That's my understanding of the smart contracts. And anybody's willing to jump into the code, they can check that for themselves. But that's the power factor you're locking in. So your power factor doesn't degrade over time. It doesn't automatically reduce. If you were to make a new deposit with a new address, right, the power factors decline over time because there's less dilution over time. But if you show up August 1st of 2024 and stake a bunch of ETH and decide to lock it up for 6 years, you'd be getting that 10.7 the entire 6-year period, right? So that's really important to understand, because that's part of what creates the urgency for people to understand the staking system, decide if that's something they want to do. Is the power factors are higher now, and I think that's logical, right? Because your dilution you know, is experienced over that entire period, right? If you're not claiming a more token, then over time, you know, uh, the total supply of Morpheus increases by that power factor. So, you know, I'm sure there's some more complex version of the math that could, treat it a bit differently, but as it is, just figuring out the smart contracts to do the curve using the uh, TANH and other factors in the math was complex enough. And so, I think it's probably wiser to keep the formula as simple as can be, right? So if you look in the MRCs, the formula basically sets a minimum, it sets the maximum for the power factor, right, at the 1.01 and at the 10.7. And then in between, based on UTC seconds, how long the emissions are staked, then it calculates this curve, right? And so there's additional risk in sort of adding more complexity. So I think the final math formula is probably the safest way to go when it comes to calculating that. But that's a great question. Let's see. Got a few questions. This is from Tiger Buildle. Where do more staking rewards come from? Capital. So this is another sort of variation to emphasizing that there are no new emissions coming out. People are just competing for proportionality, and so the same 3,456 more a day that the capital rewards started at, and are decaying over time, that same emissions bucket for capital rewards are what's providing all these staking rewards, right? The staking rewards are just part of the calculation now for how the capital group deploys all its emissions, right? So no new more are being created, right? It's just adjusting proportionality. And then the second question is, by staking more rewards, since you get more in return, why would you do this since they are giving out more than be getting otherwise? So again, I think this is sort of maybe just conflating a couple of different things. This isn't the deposits of more when it comes to capital. This is the staking of future emissions, right? And the reason someone would do that is because they believe in the Morpheus project and they want to maximize their proportion of those rewards over time, right? So it's sort of like asking, why would you stake ETH? Well, if you believe in Ethereum and want to own more Ethereum over time, you're willing to, lock it up for a year, for a few years, in order to increase your absolute number of ETH. And sort of the logic is pretty simple. If you were going to hold the Ethereum anyway for 2 years, 5 years, whatever, why not do it in a way that gives you the maximum amount of ETH over time? So if you can increase your ETH by 3% a year, a lot of people have found that compelling, right? And staking Ethereum has proven a really great development for the protocol, because it allows people to express that they're committed to the protocol over time. But that's a good question. All right. So going back to the list, checking out for other aspects. So Pirate Beard is talking about Juan Benet, which is the founder of Filecoin, and mentions that anybody would be able to rent their storage space, and sort of the parallels here with compute. I think that's an interesting point, and that's sort of what I would love to see in Morpheus, is sort of anybody be able to be a compute provider, right? And so if you look at the architecture and the notes that Ryan and Lumerin and others have released about the compute providers, is there's no big minimum, right? It doesn't only let big players be compute providers, and I think that's really important for a healthy distributed global marketplace, that anybody be able to participate. So yeah, I really like the way the tokenomics, I believe that's in MRC 40, sort of express, how that's calculated when it comes to the compute aspect. But that's the key here is, Morpheus from day one, when I read the white paper is, this is the distributed global network for compute, right? And having the ability for anybody to provide that compute jurisdiction agnostic is really key. For those that have been watching the news, the EU has instituted their restrictions on AI models, and it looks like that'll go into effect August 1st. We're only a few weeks out of that. And then, of course, the US Commerce Department is supposed to release their restrictions on AI models on the 26th, or at least the initial guidance and recommendations. So we're only a few weeks out of that. So yeah, jurisdiction agnostic is one of the key value propositions. Somebody's asking if we're recording this event. Absolutely. We started that at the beginning, so anybody will be able to go back and go through it. But I really recommend to people, beyond just listening to me talk about it, is to roll up your sleeve and try it out, right? The smart contracts are deployed on Sepolia testnet. If you want to deposit some, Sepolia test staked ETH on there, then you can see how it works. You can, try out the emission staking and see what you get for proportionality. So again, credit to Maxon and the team that put up the testnet. Again, expecting guides here shortly for anybody that wants to do it on mainnet when it goes live. But just give it a try, and that ought to sort of make a lot of the calculations clear. As there's no better substitute than giving it a try. Cool. Great. So you've got a few other questions. Somebody's asking about how do smart agents pay for compute with the MOR token? This is more to do with the architecture, and so I won't go too deep into it, but the architecture for the compute router. Anybody that holds a MOR token has a pro rata right to the inference each day that compute providers provide. And so if you look at the four main buckets, compute, code, capital, as well as builder rewards, compute gets 24% of all those rewards. And since the very first day of emissions, those MOR tokens have been building up in the compute contract. And so that's basically this big pool of resources that are available for anybody that wants to, use inference. The protocol pays the compute provider, right? So rather than the individual, paying a fee, they're staking effectively for inference. They're staking their MOR token, saying, "Hey, I want to use AI compute. I'm staking my MOR." The router gives them part of the daily budget, right? And I think that's a really brilliant approach. That was pioneered by Eric Voorhees in his Yellowstone paper, right? And proposed, hey guys, here's a way to batch all the transactions together. Here's a way to make it really easy for developers. And I think developers are probably the primary audience for people that want to use compute. It's folks like those building Venice, right? That use GPUs every day to render, images, or to, run Llama 3 or other text models or coding models. If you've used Venice AI, that's all running today on Akash and Hyperbolic and other, aggregators of compute. And as the Morpheus router goes live, they'll be able to use the Morpheus router to pick the cheapest and highest reputation providers of compute. But that's a really good thing to understand. That's a really great question. Okay, let's see. People are asking a little bit more detailed questions about the compute stuff. I'll leave that for sort of answers in the compute channel. And I don't see too many other questions about capital or code, and we've only got about 10 minutes left. So I want to sort of wrap this up again and summarize it. We're coming up pretty quick on the 25th. That's the expected day for this to go live, so just the next 7 days. If you're an STETH provider, the key is just to think through how long you want to stake your MOR emissions, right? Do you want them in 6 months, a year, and a few years? the longer you can express and signal to the community that you're committed to Morpheus, the higher your power factor will be, right? Which that's effectively the core thing in calculating your proportionality of rewards. So if you want the highest rewards, you can stake up to 6 years. But a lot of the dilution happens in the first few years. Even staking for a year, 2 years, 3 years, they're very high power factors applied to that, right? And the power factor sort of declines over time as more and more units go into emissions. And so that's the game theory to think through is like, okay, I'm providing STETH. When do I want to claim my rewards, or how long can I push them out to get a higher power factor? And again, just to emphasize that, this doesn't affect your ability. If you had some emergency, you could always withdraw your staked ETH, right? And you'd earn rewards up until you did that withdrawal, right? So this does not affect your liquidity or access to your Ethereum, your staked Ethereum in the contract, right? Beyond the normal 7 days. So really sort of a unique approach to doing staking, really based around the emissions. And, I think that's the key here is, rewarding people that are long-term aligned with Morpheus, right, is one of the best things that the protocol can do in order to really reward builders, developers, people that want to create something on top of the protocol. And obviously that's worked very well for Ethereum and Filecoin and other protocols that have adopted similar mechanisms. And again, this is something that will get extended to MOR 20 and be available more broadly for the community. But yeah, really, really big change. So just wanted to hop on here today and answer questions. We'll also have the opportunity to do another AMA, planning that looks like on the 24th. And we'll dig in more to the code weights and the code staking of more emissions, because that's sort of a bit different than the automated process that works on the capital side. I'm also expecting to have the guides and the forums and a lot of things available for people to sort of dig in by then. And then after the more emission staking goes live, expected to do another AMA after it goes on the mainnet. So yeah, I'm glad you guys could all join today. Happy to answer any other questions later on Discord, but I think this was a really good summation of where the process is at, when it's going to go live, how to best think about your options as an STETH provider. And yeah, I just really appreciate this community. I just got back from 2 weeks of travel at Ethereum Community Conference in Brussels. There was also a decentralized AI day in London. It was really great to see other AI leaders like Ahmad come out and speak at those events, or spend time with Ilya from Near, or so many of the other members of sort of the broader decentralized AI community. But there is so much momentum for this right now, and you guys are all playing a huge role. So, I'll call it there, but it's been a great discussion, and I appreciate you guys jumping on. Thanks everybody for joining in today. Take care, guys. Talk to you soon.